You make a real distinction between persuasion and manipulation. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, and I made that point early because it's a question that's very natural. When you think of influence, which is really in a sense what the book is about, influence can be defined as simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. You can do that one of two ways. You could do it through manipulating another person, or you can do it through persuading another person. And really, manipulation and persuasion are cousins. Now, one's the evil cousin, manipulation the evil cousin,
dark
right?
cousin.
The dark cousin, and persuasion's the good one. But let's face it, both the manipulator and the persuader, they both understand human interaction. They both understand human motivation. They understand what makes people tick and what makes people move to action. So. Now, but there's still a big difference, and that's the key. And obviously, we don't encourage people to manipulate, but rather to persuade. One of the best examples or explanations of the two, the difference in the two, is from a gentleman by the name of Dr. Paul W. Sweats. He wrote a book back in 1986 entitled The Art of Talking So That People Will Listen, though it was much more about listening than it was about talking. And I thought his explanation was great. According to Dr. Sweats, manipulation aims at control, not cooperation. It does not consider the good of the other party. It results in a win-lose situation. In direct contrast to the manipulator, the persuader always seeks to enhance the self-esteem of the other party. The result is that people respond better because they're treated as responsible or response-able, self-directing individuals. So it begins with intent, but that's not where it ends. See, both the manipulator and the persuader can elicit immediate action. But that's where it ends, because once you know you've been manipulated, Marie, you will avoid that person. You'll do the best you can to resist that person. Even if you have to work with that person, you'll do something to not have to be involved in some way. With a persuader, though, that's different. See, a manipulator is win at all costs. They may not want to hurt the other person, but if they have to in order to get their way, they will. They're very I-focused or me-focused. Not the case with the persuader. For them to win, the other person also has to win. So when you've been persuaded, you feel good about that person, and you're more likely to buy into their ideas again.
Yeah, and I love that distinction also, that it taps into feelings. It's like, how do you feel when you're persuaded? Is it a win-win for both of you? So many people associate sales and marketing or getting your product or your idea out into the world with somehow being pushy or somehow being manipulative. Exactly, and it's just the opposite. And that's why I was so excited to talk with you today, because I think this reframing of how to add value in other people's lives, and if we bump up against conflict, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, how do you deal with that in a way that's empathetic and compassionate, and that leaves both people not only feeling great, but it's actually a true win-win for both of them.
It is. And Marie, so many people, when they go into business and they do something they love, they have a product or service they feel so good about, and they know they can add value to people's lives, they say, oh, but I don't want to have to sell. Well, why? Because it's how they're defining selling. See, if you look at selling as something you do to someone, if you define selling as trying to convince somebody to buy something they don't want or need, who wants to do that? We couldn't feel good about something like that. Really, all selling is at its basic is simply finding out what somebody does want or need and helping them to get it.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And when you look at it that way, you can feel great about it because you're providing a service to that person.
Absolutely. So let's start off with principle number 1, which is all about being able to be the master of our own emotions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's control your own emotions. The sages of long ago asked, who is a mighty person? And they answered, that person who can control their own emotions and make of an enemy or a potential enemy a friend. It all begins with that, because see, it's only when you can control your own emotions that you're able to take a potentially negative situation or person and turn it into a win for everyone involved. But why is that so difficult? Well, because we're human beings.
Yeah.
And as human beings, we're emotional creatures. We'd like to think we're logical, and to a certain extent we are, but really we are emotion driven. We make major decisions based on emotion, and we back up those emotional decisions with logic. We rationalize, and if you take that word, it means we tell ourselves rational lies, and we do that in order to justify that emotional decision. Well, there's also emotion also comes into play when you just feel lousy about something. Now, we know nobody can make us feel bad or angry or sad or mad, but what they can do is they can either intentionally or usually unintentionally do things that push our buttons and cause ourselves to become mad or angry or sad or what have you. And when we allow ourselves to be controlled by that, we can't be part of the solution. By the very nature of the thing, we become part of the problem and things don't work out. This is not to say that we should forego our emotions. Emotions are a great part of life. They make life joyous and worthwhile. But as one of my great mentors, Dondi Scumaci, says, by all means, take your emotions along for the ride, but make sure you are driving the car.
I loved that when I read it in the book. It was so great. And I think it's so important to remember, because in those situations where buttons do get pressed, it's very easy, especially in this world where we can text in a moment. We can reply on social media. You can reply in email, and those things can't be taken back. I mean, words can't be taken back. But I think it's vital for this idea of turning adversaries or any kind of conflict, someone that we have conflict with, into an ally, of being able to chill out for a minute and not be driven by your emotions. So one of an action strategy would be to just...
Well, if you know that you're susceptible to this, then what you want to do is rehearse. Imagine situations that you know that have happened in the past, that could happen again, where your buttons could be pressed, and see both results. I mean, see what it would be like if you did what you usually do, and that's probably not the result you want. And then imagine yourself just, as Zig Ziglar used to say, responding instead of reacting. Really being in control of yourself, being calm, listening to that person first, taking a moment to decide what to do, and seeing it turn out beautifully. And, it's sort of like, I use this analogy in the book, like an astronaut who's going up into space. Before they do, he or she is going to do a lot of simulations, maybe hundreds of them. Yeah. So by the time they get up into space and something happens, they've already been there and done that. And while it's a little bit different, certainly, than actually doing it, it's not that much different. We know the mind can't tell, the subconscious can't tell the difference between what's actually happened and what's been suggested to it. So if you see yourself doing it, so you're rehearsing this, if you're picturing those wonderful results in your mind's eye, then when the situation comes up, you're much more likely to do it. And when you do, and you handle it beautifully, take pleasure in that. Congratulate yourself. Know that if you've done it once, you can do it every time. But there's one more thing, though, and that's to understand you probably won't do it right every time. At least I know I don't.
Oh, I don't either.
Yeah, and those times when we don't, because we're human and it's going to happen, we can feel a little bad about it, but not too bad. Don't go into a guilt trip about it. Understand that you're human, and you'll have many chances to practice.
Yeah, I love that. I love the rehearsing bit. And I know one thing that always works for me, we've talked a lot about it on the show, is like taking a time out. Like if you feel yourself emotionally charged by something that's come in and you don't have to respond right away, to give yourself a little bit of a cooling off period so you can clear out and then, think.
Very important.
Yeah, a little more empathetically. So let's move on. What's principle number 2?
That is to understand the clash of belief systems. And this is so very key. What is a belief? Well, a belief really is a subjective truth. It's the truth as we understand the truth to be, which doesn't mean it's the truth. It means it's our truth. Right? Yeah. Now, our truth might be the truth, but it's not necessarily, and it's probably so far less than what we think.
Right.
Well, we have our truths. Our truths are a result of our belief systems. I call it an operating system, and it's an unconscious operating system. We're not even aware of it. Our beliefs are a combination of upbringing, environment, schooling, news media, television shows, movies, popular culture, cultural mores, all the associations we have. And it's pretty much, the interesting thing about it, it's pretty much set in place by the time we're a little more than toddlers. And at that point, everything new that comes into that belief system tends to build on that foundation or that premise. So people grow up with a particular belief system, not even realizing it, thinking, saying, doing things based on those beliefs, and they live their entire life doing that.
So moving on to principle number 3, acknowledging their ego.
Yeah. And I say acknowledge their ego, not ours, because we don't have one.
You're right.
Now, we have to acknowledge ours too. We have to be aware of it. The ego, when channeled and controlled, can help us accomplish great things for ourselves and for the community as a whole. But when it gets away from us and we're not in control, that's a different thing. So when I say acknowledge their ego, it's because we need to understand that if that person is acting in any way that's counterproductive, unhelpful, and even if it's not even benefiting them, but you can tell there's a real emotional thing there, there's a good chance their ego has taken over. And
what do you suggest about acknowledging it? Like, is it just really letting that person feel heard, feel seen?
Yeah, I mean, when I say acknowledge it, I wouldn't say, "Hey, pal, your ego, it's getting away from you." No, don't do that. That would have the opposite effect.
Yeah.
No, I just mean acknowledge it to yourself that that's probably happening, and then when we go into first, of course, we have to respond as opposed to react, being in control of ourselves. We have to understand that ego is part of their belief system and is being run. We're also going to talk about, when we talk about setting the frame intact, that all has to do with that person's ego, because, their ego will come into play. And when we talk about being able to influence or gently persuade someone, a lot of that comes down to how you make that person feel.
Yes.
If you can help them to feel genuinely good about themselves and about you and about the situation, you have a lot better chance of that win-win taking place.